Hey folks, today I thought it would be fun to go through my three of my Nano Fish community tanks and kind of tell you about who's in them, why I picked them, etc. It's all coming up right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec, and I wanted to make a quick video this week. I'm still waiting on my my new tank to arrive, and I'm sort of killing time by just talking about a subject that comes up kind of a lot, and that's stocking choices. If you look back through my videos, I've actually made a couple of videos specifically on different like fluval products, like Fluval Flex, stocking the Fluval Flex and stocking the Spec and things like that. But what I want to talk to you about is sort of the interactions of fish, and especially nano fish. Now, I've made a couple of videos on nano fish too, but when I speak about nano fish, and this is kind of different for a lot of people, it's not scientific or anything. It's just a word. I'm talking about the smaller of the small fish. You know, those fish that are like under 5 inches. I think are small fish. And then if you take that down to like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, I consider those to be nano fish. Also, sometimes fish are really skinny, but they're a little bit longer than 2 inches. But you know what I mean. I'm talking about the smaller species of fish. Those are my favorites. Those are the kinds of fish that I'm instantly attracted to. A lot of times are really beautiful, colorful, interesting fish that come in these really small packages. And a lot of questions come up about how to keep them in communities. Now, I'm not touting what I've done as ideal. In some cases, I need to increase my population. A lot of the times it has to do with just like what's available in, in and around my neighborhood. I don't tend to mail order fish very often. I have great fish stores here in town. I have, for years and years, I've had the Aquarium Knoxville, which has been a great fish store. Now Aquatic Marine, which I've shopped at before, has really, they're under new ownership. I did an interview with them last year. They're under new ownership and they're really coming along. So that's another great fish store in Knoxville. I have occasionally gone to one that's actually down the street here, JK Aquatics. It's kind of small and I haven't filmed in there. I just haven't been in there with a camera yet. But we eat lunch right around the corner, and I've occasionally stopped by there and stuff. So, like a lot of fish keepers with some options in town, I've been to just about every store that's available to me. I even take a peruse by like PetSmart when I go in, or Petco. I'll peruse by their tanks too. Although I try not to buy stuff out of there. 90% of the time, it ends up being not as great. So nano fish and communities are not so different from any other type of community scenario. You want to make sure that you don't have fish that are overly aggressive. Most nano fish I've found seem to be more aggressive with their own species than they are with cross species. So it's not going to be like a betta that decides it hates your guppy, for instance. Or like an American flagfish that hates everything that isn't algae. Okay, it probably hates algae too. So a simple solution to this, and this goes for like bigger fish or smaller fish that tend to be a little bit more aggressive with each other, is just to get more and kind of distribute that aggression amongst the others. Usually it's rival males battling over females and things like that. This is pretty common across almost every species of fish that I've kept. They all want to battle for their ladies. Another good reason to get more of those, as many as possible, of these small fish, is that there's strength in numbers. They feel more comfortable. You're more likely to see them. They just naturally know, hey, there's a lot of us. Nothing's hunting us down. Whereas if there's very few of them, they might feel like, we need to hunker down and hide because we're about to be extinct. And I can't talk to fish. These are just things that seem reasonable. In case you wondered if I could talk to fish. I can't. I tried, but they don't listen. And of course, the biggest thing is don't put a fish in there that can eat the other one. Fish will pretty much eat any other fish. If it'll fit in its mouth, they'll eat them. And there are some fish that even at large sizes can't eat the smaller ones or don't eat the smaller ones, but that's a little bit rare. Or they're just a big fish with a small mouth, which happens a bit too. Some people have commented that I seem to understock a lot of my tanks, and that is very true. It's mostly for maintenance, but it's also just to keep I want to keep the most pristine water quality I can, and I'm very careful. Like, some people are okay with a little bit of conflict in their tank, like one fish chasing another fish around, or a bunch of fishes chasing each other around. I really hate that. I find it, I'm always worried about these fish that are being chased, and inevitably somebody will get chased to the point where they're just stressed out and they die. And I don't want a fish dying in the back of my tank where I don't notice it, and etc. So I tend to be really careful with my stocking choices, and I try to. And the other thing is, I don't restock necessarily right away. I'll kind of let things. I'm curious about the longevity of some of these fish, and sometimes I have no choice. Like, there aren't fish available to necessarily restock. When possible, I like to restock through breeding, but that's happened very few times, especially my nano fish, unless we're calling endlers nano fish. So let's talk about a couple of different tanks that I have. I'm going to discuss 3 of my tanks that I have stocked with mostly small fish. In all cases, I've got 1 or 2 cheater fish that are a little bit bigger. Like, my goal wasn't to only put small fish in it. It just, they're my preference, so I ended up with more of them than perhaps the other fish that are in there. In fact, most of the time when I have larger fish, it's more of a utility thing. Like, I have them in there to eat algae of some sort, or other reasons. I just thought they were pretty too, and it was a place to put them. So starting with the 4-month-old Hydra Cube, which I need to probably do an update on specifically. It's doing great. This one, a lot of the fish I have, they migrated from the 20-gallon when I reset it recently. They migrated over here to this tank. Another thing I've got going on here, which is a little bit unusual, is I've been breeding endlers. And I have a number of them in here, and they're temporarily in here. They'll be moving over to something else pretty soon, or perhaps my pet store pretty soon, because I've got a lot of endlers right now. They've already started putting babies out. I've already shared them with the 2 people that I feel most likely would want some, like Chattanooga Ed and James from Fish Room Fever. They both went home with a bag full of these. Some of them gave birth on the way home. Both of them have a lot of these little yellow endlers now. So I have a number. I have probably 6 or 7 of them in there, not including the little babies. I've seen a couple little babies floating around already. I also have about 8 exclamation point Rasboras. I love these fish. They were sold to me as chili Rasboras, and I think when I first introduced them, I talked about them as chili Rasboras, and I was corrected by my wonderful audience who notices when I mess up. I do have 1 legit chili Rasbora downstairs, and but these guys have been great. They're so tiny. I really want more. I'd love to put probably 30 or 40 of these exclamation point Rasboras in here. They're really neat. They seem smaller than my chili Rasbora, and maybe they just haven't grown all the way or something yet. But they're really neat tiny fish. They don't get very big at all. You do need to make sure you don't have another fish that can eat them. They're kind of like, I think they're the smallest fish that I own. And I don't know if when they're fully grown, if they'll be bigger than some of the other fish we'll talk about. But as of now, they're very tiny. Like, they're just a little bit bigger than maybe the baby endlers and stuff. Another fish I have in here that's like almost impossible to photograph. I think I've got maybe a couple of little glimpses of them, and they're probably blurry. I apologize. Are the emerald Rasboras. Now, these emerald Rasboras, and this is a common name. I'll try to put the scientific name up here too. They're very much like the celestial pearl Danios, but they have different colorations on the side. They have kind of a green tint on the side and some stripes. Really, really neat. It's one of the few fish that I picked up. I did pick this up at a Petco. So I was walking, and I've seen them maybe only 3 times in my local fish store. Maybe I didn't notice other times when they're in there, but they're very rarely in there, or it might be a seasonal thing that I keep missing. But I walked by Petco and I saw like 8 of them in this tank, and I took the whole tank. I just said, give me all of them. And I took them home and I put them in here. I have a real hard time, like, that's another one where the population really, they do well when their population's up a lot higher. They love well-planted tanks, and I think that what they're doing now is they sit in the middle of this knot. I've got kind of this knot of anubias and plants of all sorts inside of here, and they dart in and out of there. So they kind of just rule the inside of this knot in there. I started off with about 8. I think the most I've counted at once is about 5. Definitely a fish I'm looking to get more of. It's cool to have room to grow in some of these too, or to stock a little bit slower. Like the fish won't be super comfortable at first, but sometimes it's better not to throw like 40 of the same fish in a tank all at once. You know, maybe let the bio load adjust a little bit and then add some more if you can, especially if they're readily available. A new fish that I've added to this tank is a Hillstream Loach. This tank also actually has a lot of flow, especially up here at the top. There's a fair amount of flow in different areas of this tank, so I felt like it was safe enough to add one of those. In the past, I've refrained from getting Hillstream Loaches because a lot of my tanks aren't very fast flowing, and they're river fish. I mean, they're made. You can see just the way they're designed. They're like kind of like a tiny stingray, and I love that. But they're really beautiful. A little bit expensive, but really beautiful fish. And I decided to add one in here to observe, and I've really enjoyed seeing it. A relatively new fish that I just started talking about last week was the rainbow goby, and I've added him in here. One in here and one in there. They're both seem to be doing really good. They really love to eat biofilm. Like they're kind of really similar to the autosynclus, but easier to feed, if that makes sense. I've noticed them going after brine shrimp and like other kind of meaty foods too when I throw it in. I had some live brine shrimp. I threw it in there. I've thrown frozen food in there, and they pounce on either of those things. I noticed it a little bit more in my little 10-gallon tank than I noticed it in here. But yeah, they're always grazing over the leaves and on the glass and everywhere around the tank. But they will jump on flake food even, and other kinds of food. So real easy to feed, kind of, which makes them kind of a good alternative maybe to autosynclus, which I love. I love autosynclus, but if you don't have enough biofilm, you can accidentally starve them out. So that's important. And I know they're not fish, but I have a lot of my orange shrimp in here. They seem to be kind of flourishing in here. I don't see any babies. So I think that the babies might be getting picked off, or they're deep in the knot, or they've crawled into the back of the filter and they hang out. I find shrimp all throughout the back of these filters. The Flex and the Megaflex and this thing, all these ones with these kind of built-in back filters. I used to worry about that quite a lot. Now I don't worry about it. The back filter is kind of a great place for these things to go and reproduce, and relative safety. There's a lot of stuff to graze on, a lot of biofilm and stuff on the media to graze on, which probably helps keep it, a little bit cleaner. I'm sure my impeller is probably eaten a couple of babies here and there, but it doesn't seem to be a big deal, especially in my other tanks where they're quite prolific. My cheater fish in this tank is a Siamese algae eater. They have one of those that I was talking about with a really small mouth. I'm sure that they could eat a shrimp or something, especially at adult size. This one's a tiny baby one, and I noticed I was getting a little bit of hair algae here and there, and even blackbeard algae. I saw like little patches of that, and they were on leaves that I didn't necessarily want to pluck out because I didn't want to kill the plant. I'd be basically picking the plant, without to no leaves, which can't be good. So I decided to add the smallest one in here. It's going to be a major pain to catch later because eventually he will outgrow this tank and I'll have to catch him, but they grow very slow. And he's been real productive. He's helped keep the hair algae in check in here. Haven't had much of a problem with that at all since I added him. And he doesn't bother. I've never seen him chasing a shrimp around. He doesn't chase the other fish around, so he's been a good neighbor. Another fish I have in here is the Rosy Loach. I've got 3. I've got 2 females and a male Rosy Loach. The female Rosy Loaches are kind of like this speckled color, and the males have like a red rosy tint. This is another fish that I'd like to add more of. I've got some in a tank that we'll talk about in just a minute, and I've got some in here. They're another one that hides a lot, and I'm thinking that they hide a lot mostly because of their population. I used to see them, they're another one that migrated over from the 20-gallon, and I used to see them all the time in the 20-gallon. I see them much less here, but there's a lot more hiding places in this tank than there were over there, even when it was fully grown out. They're a really, really neat, small loach, very interesting to observe when you can. And yet another fish that I'm kind of on the lookout for. So when I see them, and if I can afford it, I'll pick them up. I think probably at this point I need to find a good online retailer and just fill out the rest of my collection in here after I move all the endlers out. I've also got 2 Amano shrimp. They're juvenile Amano shrimp, so they're pretty small Amano shrimp in there. And they kind of help round out my algae eating crew and leftover food and that sort of thing. Moving downstairs to my spec 16-gallon. Inside of this tank I have about 8 celestial pearl Danias. I've got a few that are looking kind of old. Most of these fish I actually bred. I bred them in the fluviflora. Well, it was the face tank, the old fluviflora that now has a couple of little blue-eyed rainbows in. I had a terrible ammonia spike in there, and my shrimp were dying left and right. I migrated, and this is right after I had redone the spec, so I wasn't sure if that one was even ready to accept fish, but I had to emergency migrate my shrimp, Amano shrimp, cherry red shrimp. So I just put them over in the other tank as quick as I could, and I think I recovered most of them. And now their population has exploded inside the spec. I also went through and caught out all of the celestial pearl Danias, and I put them in the spec. Then weeks later, basically with that tank I refilled it, and weeks later I found little babies inside. And those babies grew up and they became basically what I have now as far as stocking for the celestial pearl Danias. When they got large enough to move over, I moved them over into the spec with their parents. And for a while I had a pretty big school of about probably 13 or 14 of those things. They've been in my care for a long time, and they're basically raised in the tank that they're in, and they seem much more comfortable than ones that I've purchased. And I guess that makes sense, right? I mean, they've always been in there, so that's what they know of the world, and they're a lot less timid. Usually if you buy something at the store, maybe it was wild caught or it's gone through some sort of journey to get to your place, and they just hide in the back and they never come out. That was kind of the case with their parents. They're very timid fish. They come out and get some food and stuff, then they'd run away. These I see out all the time. Now granted, it is a jungle inside this tank. This tank is very overgrown. I haven't I've sort of neglected it a little bit, and by neglect I mean I just haven't trimmed the plants, so everything's just kind of grown over like it's a really big mess in there. A big mess maybe for me looking at it, but not a big mess for them. They love running around inside of this jungle and just kind of chasing each other. I've tried to breed them again kind of by pulling moss and things out that I think that they might be laying eggs in different plants, and I'll put them over in the sump or some other place that's doesn't have any predators in it, so I could try to raise them up. But I haven't ever been able to breed them again. So probably a good tactic with those guys is what they call musical fish. Put them in a tank, maybe a planted tank, maybe something less with spawning mops or something. Feed them a whole lot of live food and get fattened up, or do that first. Put them in one of those tanks, let them sit for a couple of weeks, and then pull them out and put them back in their tank, and just see if any babies come out. That's probably the best bet for breeding those particular fish. So anyway, I think I'm down to maybe 5 or 6 of those fish. I'd really like to add some more. That's another one I'm always on the lookout for. I love celestial pearl Danias. They're among my favorite. Also have Rosy Loaches in there. I haven't been able to catch them on film recently, but I have seen them at different times. I look at that tank a lot while I'm eating dinner, so I've seen them in there before. I know they're still there. Also in that tank I have a half beak. I started out with actually a few of those, and it got down to just one. But it's lasted a couple of years now, and it's really interesting to observe. This is one I'm really worried about, especially with the high population of cherry shrimp in there. I am absolutely certain that every now and then he catches an unlucky one. I think for the most part they're too fast for him, but he probably catches an unlucky one now and then and eats it, which is fine. He and the Danias readily take flake food. They don't seem to mind what kind of food you feed them. I try to feed a mixture of different things, but really beautiful, interesting fish, the half-beak. Also in that tank, I have a very mature, actually two very mature Amano shrimp. There's some of the oldest shrimp that I have, some of the oldest fish that I have. They're going on about 10 or 11 years. These are shrimp that I got when I first started the hobby. I've been kind of they've been in so many of my tanks. They've gone from tank to tank to tank. They're tremendous algae eaters. I suspect they're the reason I haven't seen any baby Danias even in that dense forest in there. Adult Amano shrimp are fairly aggressive. They don't only eat algae, they'll eat anything. And they eat it a lot. So I suspect that they're probably gathering up the eggs and eating them. Now, cherry red shrimp don't eat eggs, and I don't have proof that the Amano shrimp do, but I would not be surprised. And that's actually all that's in the spec. It's pretty low stocked. My last tank I want to talk about is the Megaflex. The Megaflex has another one of my most favorite nano fish. It's called the Ember Tetra. I have a lot of these Ember Tetras. In the past, I've tried to keep them, and in fact, I made a video about them a while back, and they're very timid. You didn't see them very often. They wouldn't come out. Increasing their number up over 10, like if you get to about 12 or 15, I think I'm at about 16 of them right now, and I see them all the time. They come out quite a lot. Something I forgot to mention too about those about populations is that sometimes if you want to keep a single fish, sometimes it doesn't do as well as if you keep them in a community of fish, because there'll be other fishes. Well, sometimes they call them dither fishes, right? And that'll be a fish that doesn't really mind where it goes all over the tank. It'll kind of encroach onto some territory, and then the fish will come out to sort of defend its territory. So a fish you wouldn't see a lot might come out to kind of like display and kind of drive the other fish off. Or they'll just see another fish that's up at the top of the tank and think, oh, well, if that guy's safe, maybe I'm safe. And yeah, I promise I don't talk to fishes. That's something that's been told to me before. The fish will see other fish running around and assume that it's probably okay. So it's okay for them to be out too. Back to the subject. So I've got a bunch of Ember Tetras. They're really, really neat. Higher population is definitely the key. They're a lot more common than a lot of the other fish I've talked about, and I see them a lot. So they must be pretty easy to breed. I've never bred them that I've known of in any of my tanks, but I do see them quite a lot. So they're pretty easy to get, and I definitely recommend them. A couple of fish that I like, I haven't had a lot of luck with, but I really like, are these blue-eyed rainbows. And I have a variant. I think this one is called a red neon blue-eyed rainbow. There were 3 of them. It's a fairly new fish. I just got it a few weeks ago. I'm only seeing 1 right now. Very difficult to film these also. So I've got a couple of spotted blue-eye rainbows up here, but down there I've got one, I think it's down to 1, a red neon blue-eyed rainbow, which was really beautiful when I saw them. So I've got another rainbow goby downstairs. They've become one of my favorite little algae eater fish to add to a tank. Very unshy. I see them quite a lot. They're always out running around, and it has the same behavior as the other 2 that I have upstairs here. It pretty much goes for any kind of food, and I'll always see it grazing around on all the different plants and stuff around the tank. It also doesn't seem to like, they don't seem very aggressive. Now version that I have in my Gobie tank over here, I will see him kind of lunge at some of the other gobies in there, but it's never like an attack or anything. It's more trying to get to food first, mostly. Also in that tank I have some cheater fish. I have some, Siamese algae eaters. All these Siamese algae eaters that I've talked about today will eventually end up in the 210. Those fish do get that big. And they'll last a little bit longer maybe in the Megaflex than they will in the 25 gallon here, but they do a great job of eating algae though, and I'm just kind of raising them up in these smaller tanks so they don't get eaten by Mr. Tubes as a snack. This is another tank with some adult Amano shrimp. These are probably 5 or 6 years old. Amano shrimp, I've got about 3 of those in there. Another cheater fish that I have in there is the longfin bristlenose pleco. I just thought it was beautiful, and again, they're great for kind of keeping the algae off the glass and in different areas of the tank. Love those things. Also in this tank is one of my favorite of the small fish, and it is the Pygmy Cory Cat. I actually have about 5 of them, but I found one that was swimming in kind of a perfect spot. The Megaflex can be difficult to film things in. If you hit that curve the wrong way, everything is just always out of focus. But I have about 7 of the Pygmy Cory Cats. It's a fish that I buy. Anytime I see them at the fish store, I pick them up. I love Pygmy Cory Cats. I'd really love to breed them. That's a fish that I'd love to kind of do a little breeding program with. I actually keep them in with my orange shrimp also. And I know we weren't going to talk about the flora, but my flora that's got the orange shrimp, I've started adding them in there. I see tons and tons of little tiny babies, so they don't seem like they're eating those little baby shrimp, which is good. I'm hoping that they'll eat the planaria that's in there, but I don't think that's really happening either because I'm still able to trap, a fair amount of that. But they're kind of in there as like the only fish in that particular tank, and so if there's any chance of breeding them, I have bred them by accident one time. I only got one baby out of it, and I saw the baby, I was like, oh my gosh, and then it disappeared into the tank. And now I don't know if it's one of the ones I have or not. But it was much smaller than any that I'd bought, so I knew it was new, but I don't know if it survived. At one point, I had about 15 or 20 of them in a tank, and I saw them much more often because they're just everywhere inside of the tank. They're an interesting fish too, because sometimes they get real tight schools and they all swim together like in formation, and then sometimes they're just spread all over the tank. So I think they like each other's company, but they don't rely on it necessarily. I think that's about it. I probably missed something somewhere. It's a pretty small community. Try to keep it mostly to just a few species of fish and just increase the populations of them the best I can. And it's still a very active tank. That's just what I did. I'd love to hear how you like to stock your fish. So in about a week or so, I'm going to be taking my 27-gallon tank down. I'm replacing it with a 40-gallon or a little over 40-gallon tank from 7 ports. And those nano fishes will be added to the populations of my other tanks. A lot of them will go into a big tank I have upstairs, but I'm also going to divide some into this tank and probably the Megaflex as well. I have some green neon tetras that I bought years ago from Rachel O'Leary in a video called Fish by Mail, I think. I've still got those. They've migrated from like 3 different tanks now. I'll probably put them in the Megaflex to kind of finish out their life in there. And I've got a number of other fish that will be scattered into these other tanks and stuff as I make room for a brand new project. And I hope you'll come and join me. I've also got a mail order of plants coming from buseplant.com. I'm not sure if they'll be in the new tank or if I'm going to add them to the 20-gallon here that you can't see, but we'll talk about that soon. I'd really like to take just a moment and give a huge thank you to all my Patreon supporters. The only reason I'm able to buy fish in the middle of kind of uncertain economic times and do some of the other things that I do is because you support me, and that bit of money that I get from you guys, it makes a difference. You are part of this video. You're part of the reason that this video exists, and you have my undying gratitude. I really appreciate it. If you want to join me on there, one of the perks is one-on-ones. A lot of people don't really take advantage of that perk. Like, I'm not constantly doing one-on-one, so I do have free time, but if you ever wanted to talk to me one-on-one about your aquariums and what's going on, maybe get some advice or just to show me, that's one of the things you can do on there. Also accept one-time donations if you want to help just a little bit. I don't come on here to beg for money or anything like that. This show's free to everyone, but if you want to help, there are ways to help. Got some real exciting stuff coming up for the end of the year. The podcast project continues. I've got some huge names. Some of the biggest names in fish keeping are talking to me, and they're going to be talking to you too in the form of really long-form content that I think is fun and exciting. I'll talk more about that and everything else later. Until then, and until we meet again, follow your bliss. Keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.